in my second approach, I sort of take this post-custodial approach and community-based approach in a lot of my archival and socially engaged art projects and oral history projects. It's basically, again, sort of rooted in the philosophy behind community-based archives that has, as a philosophy, been written about earlier on by many other scholars, mainly Kate Thymer and other folks that I've been referring to in my past when I've been delving into this as early as the early 2000s, but then thinking about how it's about engaging the knowledge and the expertise beyond what is established in the ivory tower in academia by involving those that are most intimately affected by the research projects that are happening in communities to shape the research questions, frame the interpretations, and design meaningful research products and archival products and actions, particularly thinking about how this also aligns with this idea of a post-custodial effort to archive activist efforts in history in the communities that are being served. So it's sort of like a two-pronged approach, involving the community as equal stakeholders in what you foresee in your project design as you begin an oral history project or an archival project or anything having to deal with community history, and then thinking about it not just as like an academic institution or a cultural heritage institution coming into a community, but also thinking about whether it should be held by an institution. Why not have it be fostered and serviced by the community, which is interested in having that history documented to begin with? So we can have it both ways. In many ways, university, academic institutions, cultural heritage institutions have had those funds. But then there's also these issues of rights and the idea that we would be open to sharing our knowledge base with the community without having to necessarily have a hand in actually taking or stewarding those collections is this new area that I'm very interested in amplifying, right? While we could always keep on offering those services and that as an option, a viable option for community stakeholders. It's also good to sort of be that person on the side who says, we will also be glad to help you should you choose to steward your own collections that we ultimately choose to archive and document. It's just something to keep in mind, and that's something that I've been trying to increase my level of self-awareness as an archivist who works at an academic institution, but then also independently, thinking about how I can help foster the sense of community and engagement for the local neighborhood community that doesn't necessarily think that they should just have their archival material or their oral history collections ultimately housed in an academic institution. They could choose to house it for themselves should they have the resources, the wherewithal, and the capacity to do so, if that makes any sense. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to present some case studies of where I've used a combination of both of these approaches, more so to just thinking about my own independent local practice as an oral historian and activist, and happy to share further details and information during the Q&A portion of the presentation. So the first project I'm going to present on is basically on mutual aid efforts in Bushwick, Brooklyn, that I was interested in documenting during the pandemic. And here you'll see on the slide basically the list of values and beliefs, and this is taken from, borrowed from the Mutual Aid NYC collective group, which is this network that arose in New York City to provide resources for mutual aid workers throughout the city during the pandemic. Thinking about their belief system, and I wanted to just share that. I'm not going to read it all, but I'm just going to leave it up there so you all can take a look at it. But basically, mutual aid is this act of solidarity and care between neighbors. And it stands in opposition to charity and top-down giving because it is planned and executed by a community and for a community, and to not just provide food and essential items, but also to educate through political education and to organize local residents. So with the project that basically arose from that time during the pandemic, Nos Cuidamos was this collaborative oral history project between me representing my project Cities for People Not for Profit in Bushwick and the Anti-Eviction Mapping Project. And it began in April of 2020, where we documented stories of how residents in Bushwick, Brooklyn were organizing to meet each other's needs during COVID. And we conducted interviews during that time over Zoom with neighboring residents and organizers participating in mutual aid in order to understand how their work fits within the larger context of housing organizing and racial justice movements that were happening at that time. And in the United States, this was all happening all at once. During that first year of COVID, we were also having so many social protests going on in the streets. And so around that time, mutual aid was arising. So it just seemed like the perfect political moment to start documenting these stories. And we were really interested in capturing those nuances. I'm going to share a clip of one of the stories that we collected as a part of this project. And the interviews that we collected for this project were mostly audiovisual, just audio. And one of them was from one of our district leaders in the New York Assembly, District 53 at the time, Samuel Namir Olivares, and he was also a co-founder of Bushwick Ayuda Mutua, which was a local community-based organization, a collective here in Bushwick. And here in this clip, he's reflecting on his organizing work at the intersection of housing, food access, and education before and during the pandemic. And here he's sharing how the current health emergency sort of magnified the eviction crisis that residents had been fighting for decades in the neighborhood and in the city. So here I'm going to play this clip.
One of the main reasons of people are hungry is because the fear of eviction. And I don't know to which extent this makes sense to people, but the food insecurity stem not because people don't have the money to buy food. Oftentimes, they could figure out a way to make $100 per week somehow to do some work, risking their lives in some sort of service to buy the food. However, the fear of eviction and housing instability and landlord harassment, harassment from the landlords is so big, so dramatic that these people, that our families, our neighbors were willing to go hungry and literally to pay rent. So the majority of the families that we serve, they pay the first 2 3 months. I don't know how, and they do not know either. They spend all the savings that they had. They went out and worked and they paid the rent. And then they thought about food. So the the level of desperation and pressure and oppression and fear that you have to forego such a critical life-saving basic need, um and not having enough food for your children, but you have to choose between having a safe like shelter or food. It was heartbreaking, and that's why we were actually, because of housing, we were doing food. So it's very interconnected, and we knew that if we provide the food, it was some sort of relief for many families. Well, they were, because they were adamant of not paying rent because of the uncertainty of the, and also many lack of information, and because the eviction moratorium was not publicized enough, and most people do not understand that, and the people who knew it that that was a catch for all, uh, temporary solution, and they all said, well, yes, we cannot evict it now, but then I have if I we saw and heard from many families of how housing was at the top two priorities after food. And I feel frustrated and like lack of incompetence that we honestly couldn't help more. I mean, it was, we had what, like 4,000 families and or more in our database, and they all couldn't pay rent. If you multiply, it would literally be $500,000 that we will have need to like do a cash assistance program to pay their rent, right? And like I'm sure we will have loved to do that, but we could raise at much $3,000 per week to buy food, right? So I think the connection between the housing insecurity during COVID was striking and is still happening. And I would be missed to not say and to finish the fully funded schools, right? Because of the intersection of the education of fully funded schools with after school programs. So families have quality education and they can stay in their neighborhoods and have, quality child care, affordable child care, or free child care, so they are able to pay, use those fundings to pay rent and stay in their communities.
You mentioned.
So I'm going to flip over back to the slides. And thinking about Sammy's clip, it's just a sample of some of the many interviews that we were able to collect as a part of the project. So later on, it was during the summer, the following summer of 2021, we were thinking about what could we do with these collected stories other than posting them online and archiving them digitally. How can we give this back to the community, engage the community, thank the community, and use this as a springboard to build community power and empowerment and basically good old-fashioned team building activities. And we decided, let's re-envision how we want to disseminate this oral history and create a bilingual zine. So we did a Spanish-English zine, which we combined the oral history interviews, we compiled them, and we made them available as printout zines. And we organized this event that following summer at a local community garden, Bushwick Community Farm. We invited the organizers as well as their friends and family to just come, neighborhood residents to come and stop by for some food, some storytelling. We had the narrators on hand to read the excerpts from their own interviews, to share those stories of basically their experiences working in mutual aid during the pandemic in the neighborhood and working in community. And we were thinking about, obviously, the intention of this event was not only to spread the word about the project and to give out the zine, but then also to use this as a way to thank the narrators who contributed their story, as well as their mutual aid organizing collectives and groups who had worked so tirelessly to care for their neighbors in Bushwick during the pandemic in the midst of an ongoing eviction crisis at the time. So we found that very rewarding, but then also thinking ahead about how this can also be an opportunity and a continual opportunity for us to keep touching base with these organizations and these workers, to use the zines also to help bolster their community crowdfunding initiatives and campaigns, to help attract attention and donorship and donors to help contribute towards these causes, to provide continual support for the community that still very much needs these services around mutual aid, food insecurity in the neighborhood. And so as I was segueing from that project on, obviously we're still sort of dealing with the ramifications of what we're going through at the moment in New York City. And while I wanted to keep on documenting via oral history how the community was experiencing continued housing injustice in Bushwick, I was also working to build collaboration with other groups to find new ways to enhance community engagement with these stories that reflect these instances of resilience and community building, particularly amongst Latinos in the Bushwick community. So it was with this mindset that I started my next project in early 2021 to further document the struggles of displacement and gentrification within the Latinx community in New York City, but this time by combining the oral histories with original music based on the oral history clips. And that's how I began work on this collaborative project, Donde Puedo Ir, Searching for Home, which is a series of original multimedia vignettes, video works centered around musical songs that were created around the recorded oral history interviews that I was able to collect that summer of Latinx experiences, documenting those Latinx experiences by residents in Bushwick, reflecting on their thoughts on housing insecurity, as well as political turmoil and socioeconomic instability that we experience within our communities, coming from various different countries in Latin America, but how we have this rich community here in Bushwick and Brooklyn, in North Brooklyn. And the work surfaces some of the core myths and ideologies around labor, self-determination, individualism, and the struggle to be able to afford to stay in the city. And what's really disturbing too is that just this past week, I saw a newspaper article that was announcing that New York City is the most expensive city in the United States recently. And I'm like, well, I didn't need a newspaper article to tell me that, but just to sort of give you the sense of like the daily struggle that it is for those of us who belong to like working class families and come from working class areas in the city, how it is a daily struggle to survive. And thinking about the effects of this on our community, we wanted to sort of focus on these stories. And so I'm going to play a clip of one of the stories that we were able to screen. And this one is by Manuel Almanche, an Ecuadorian entrepreneur who helped revitalize the Wyckoff Avenue business area for the past 25 years in Bushwick, and is the founder of the Wyckoff Merchants Association, which promotes and advocates for economic development and higher quality of life on Wyckoff Avenue through civic and community engagement. And here is his story.
Mi nombre es Manuel Mache y
Yep,
yo soy
we got it.
40 años. Yo soy de Quito. Me eduqué en el norte en el área del Colegio Militar del Faro. Ya vine una preparación a estudiar aquí por medio de la parcería en la Universidad de Washington University, la cual me gradué de Business. Fui a la Universidad de Baruch College a pasar exámenes de Real Estate y de negocios. Con esa preparación yo he podido llegar a servir a la comunidad y pasé también aquí a poner mis negocios en el área de Wyckoff, que llevo como 25 años y he podido crear negocios de todos los países, ecuatorianos, mexicanos, dominicanos. Creo que he logrado mi propósito con la educación y ver a la comunidad que ha ido progresando. Porque al uno estar preparado, creo que debemos servir a la comunidad, no solamente a la familia, que gracias a Dios mis padres eran personas de negocios. Siempre nos decía, pónganse su propio negocio. Soy de la estación Wyckoff Merchants Association, soy el presidente. Hemos hecho como el primer festival de Wyckoff, hemos hecho la primera reunión de comerciantes de todas las nacionalidades del Wyckoff. Hace 20, 25 años, esta área era pura droga. Viendo lo que estaba abajo, destruido, tratamos que se mejore el área. Y no solamente para latinos, sino que es como negocios de todos los países que tenemos. A mí me dio la pandemia. Gracias a Dios doy gracias, estoy con vida, pero ha sido fuerte. Y me siento a veces con un poquito de tristeza. A ver, 8 amigos murieron, dueños de negocios, dueños que colaboraban, en la cual uno se acuerda de ellos, muchachos trabajadores, jóvenes. Y esta pandemia destrozó, han cerrado los negocios, cambiaron de dueños, todo eso, pero sin embargo seguimos luchando. La situación que me siento yo, que ellos tan fuertes en los negocios, porque si hay un negocio en Nueva York, es para seguir adelante. Cuando empezamos hace 20 años, le mejoramos los negocios con el departamento de la ciudad, con la policía, cambiamos las puertas, pintamos, en la cual al cambiar todo eso, venía más negocio, vinieron negocios limpios. Ha vuelto nuevamente el vandalismo, no hay la protección de la policía. No los culpo a ellos porque ellos cumplen órdenes, pero les da miedo la vecindad. Cerrábamos a las 10 de la noche, ahora ¿qué hora cerramos? 6, 7 de la noche. Disminuye el dinero, disminuye la forma de pagar las rentas. Ese es el impacto dentro de lo que ha pasado últimamente a través del coronavirus. Hemos tratado de otra vez empezar. ¿Por qué? Porque el espíritu y corazón de trabajo de todo negociante pide unirnos nuevamente y romper las barreras con nuestra pandemia y podemos por lo menos hacer dinero y trabajar en grupo entre nosotros. Uno hay que esforzarse y darle un ejemplo a los hijos. Una cosa, rompiendo barreras, lo bueno, lo malo y lo feo, creo que gracias a Dios nos sentimos bien y tenemos que seguir adelante. Estamos bien, yo me siento que se ha cumplido un aspecto positivo en la comunidad. A través de la pandemia tenemos que seguir luchando. Porque yo voy a hacer un logo, siempre venceremos. Si hay espíritu, corazón y coraje, siempre venceremos siempre, unidos de ayer, de hoy y siempre.
So thinking about the effects of this project, and again, sort of like thinking again in this collaborative mode, collaborating with a good neighbor and a musician friend of mine, Luis Delias, who is a Venezuelan immigrant in Bushwick. He helped compose the stories, working in community with other community organizations, having these interviews conducted at Mayday Space in Bushwick, a social justice activist hub that does a lot of community events and sponsorship in the community, and reaching out to folks, local leaders through word of mouth. And again, sort of like capturing a slice of the life of how local Latinx residents were dealing with these issues. And we had several narrators, but we were able to host a virtual event just this past February online over Zoom, and we were able to do that performance and share it back with the community. Again, thinking about having that community building. We're scheduled to have it at Mayday Space in February, but then we had the Omicron breakout that year in February, so we had to pivot and move the event online, but we were still able to foster that community building, the community engagement, and thinking about envisioning, for those of you that are working or interested in working in oral history projects and thinking about uses and applications of oral history beyond just the archival or things that can be transcribed and researched, thinking about ways that oral histories and stories and storytelling, cuentacuentos, can be used to in other forms of outreach. And I've had quite a good response thinking about this in terms of the output in thinking about this in the terms of art. People can relate to songs. It helps increase that level of empathy. It speaks to a wider audience at many times. It's just about increasing levels of accessibility. And it doesn't necessarily have to be art related, but just anything, again, that is easy and accessible for the community to participate and to share, I think is something that can help bolster these sorts of levels of engagement as we start re-envisioning, thinking about what is community history and what would be the end product for that and for what purpose and how it sort of has to be designed depending on your need within your own communities, thinking about what kind of a product do we envision creating? Does it have to be academic? It could be non-academic as well, and still sort of have that same push. Again, it's sort of just, it should vary project by project. So let me see if I could share my last clip. See, Microsoft Teams. So then following that, thinking along those lines thematically around the needs of the community, it propelled me to think about my next project, my current project, which is my first documentary film based on these oral history interviews that I've been collecting. It's called Mujeres Atrevidas, which is capturing the stories of perseverance and strength of female low-income immigrant workers in North Brooklyn and their fight for labor rights through their involvement with Workers' Justice Project, Proyecto Justicia Laboral, which is a worker center based in Brooklyn. And I'm going to refresh this page first before I do it. Test this out before I share it, because I don't want the audio to provide the same problems as before. But here I'm going to play a 1 minute sizzle reel, basically getting a sense. It's currently a work in progress, and it will be a bilingual documentary following around the story of 4 female workers through their daily life experiences as workers and how their lives intersect along the Workers' Justice Project, their involvement and advocacy work through Workers' Justice Project. And I'm really interested in capturing those nuances. So let me see if I could play that clip for you. And let's see if that works. Let me know if you can hear the audio first before I continue.
Yep, we hear it.
En México, yo le dije que si me podía venir con ella. Ella me dijo, te voy a pagar el mismo dinero de aquí. Pues yo no sabía que acá eran dólares. Yo trabajo 7 días a la semana y absorbo todos esos químicos. Imagínense cómo ha de estar mi organismo, mi cuerpo.
You're going to meet workers in the worst day of their lives or in the best day of their life. Our responsibility is building from scratch industries. Never have like some kind of infrastructure or minimum standards of labor.
El proyecto de justicia laboral me enseñó a que yo supiera mis derechos. Nos fuimos organizando y ya se convirtió en un grupo de Liberty Cleaners. Ellos ahora nos dan entrenamientos de limpieza, nos enseñaron a hacer una crema, desempeño un trabajo mucho mejor.
So I'm just pulling up the slides once again, bear with me. And so then basically that's the hope, is that through this look, I'm hoping to provide insight into what the daily conditions of these female identified frontline workers, the issues that they face. And Mujeres Atrevidas is going to illuminate, the goal is we want to illuminate the key role that worker centers such as the female-led Workers' Justice Project can have in cities and states across the country where new labor policies and standards, such as the Domestic Workers' Bill of Rights and higher minimum wages can be enacted. And ultimately, the hope with the film is that we will be able to testify to the ability that these female workers how they can sustain and improve their lives as they reflect on questions regarding New York City's future and its relationship to labor. And here I have on the slide, we had a preliminary short screening of the work in progress at the 5 Miles Gallery in Crown Heights in Brooklyn this past October. And again, it's sort of like a continual work in progress. I recently got I was granted a place as a BRIC documentary intensive participant. And BRIC is a public broadcasting channel in Brooklyn. They do a lot of public access television. They also have a lot of media production that's offered to the community. And I was able to participate in it, and now that's helping us develop the 10-minute featurette. The hope is to develop this into a full-length feature. But then during the screening, this is one of the workers. This is Ernesta, and she's a food app delivery worker, and she's part of the union called Los Deliveristas in New York City, and that they have a New York City chapter, but they're a nationwide union of these food delivery workers who are fighting to ensure their labor rights in North Brooklyn. Really hoping through the film to weave together the interviews and the footage of their lives, their participation in political events and rallies, but we also want to focus on the friendships, the sense of community, camaraderie, and empowerment that these women have found since becoming involved in joining advocacy campaigns with the Workers' Justice Project. And this is a project that's very near and dear to my heart because during the pandemic, I was following their activity on Twitter. They're a very strong activist group. But what was striking to me was the fact that not a lot of the women were being the spokespeople for this movement. So this film is hoping to correct that and to make space for the women workers in these industries and in these fields to focus on their stories as well. So again, it's like sort of just like making sure that there's space at the table for everyone to represent their stories. And I think that that also sort of takes a level of self-awareness and just knowing where in your community you hear, not only making space for the stories that you think are interesting, but noticing where the silences are. And I think that it's very important to capture those nuances when you flip your hat from being an archivist to a producer of stories that you think matter and that are important. Really try to be cognizant. And I think that as oral historians, we do share that ability. We become much better listeners, but it also heightens your awareness and your sensitivity to the silences. So thinking about how you can apply that in your own archival practices going forward, it would be very interesting also to see that. So I'm going to take some time for questions. And again, thank you so much for allowing me to share about my work and for listening. And I'm open to any questions that you might have. I do have some prompts in case we wanted to kick off the discussion that I thought would be really interesting thinking about this, thinking about questions along post-custodial relationships and any challenges and takeaways that I have encountered through my own work through co-creation, right? Because sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's challenging. So happy to like throw out those as possible themes for discussion. I'm thinking also about the participatory, people-centered element of collections, as well as notions around allyship and solidarity. if you identify as a member of these groups, but what happens when you don't identify as a member of these groups? What are some things that you're interested in discussing and learning more about, and just sort of opening the floor to that discussion. But anyway, I'll just end it right there. So again, thank you so much.
Cynthia, I just wanted to say real quick, thank you for this amazing presentation. This is amazing work and definitely very thought-provoking. And I just wanted to remind folks that they can make their questions either in English or in Spanish, and they can also write their questions in the chat if they wish.
And I mean, if folks also feel comfortable, if they want to turn on their cameras too, I mean, if folks feel okay about that too, that's always an option as well. But if not, no pressure. I see a hand raised, and yeah, if folks, I'm getting a notice that there are only 5 minutes left in the meeting. I don't know what to do about that notice, Jose.
No, we can ignore that
Okay.
notice, definitely.
Sure. But whoever raised their hand, I don't know who's facilitating the Q&A in the chat. Jose, if you want to do it, or if you want me to do it, but if anybody wants to chime in, they should just jump right in.
Yeah, feel free to just, go
I
ahead.
raised my hand. Sorry. I don't have a camera to turn on, but I was really interested. You mentioned an anti-eviction map. And I was
Yes.
really interested in that concept. I don't know if you could go into detail about that a bit.
No, not a problem. Anti-eviction mapping project is this US-based collective. They began their work creating a GIS map showing the rates of eviction in the Bay Area of California, and they have now chapters throughout the country. And it was my involvement with their New York City chapter when I did the Nos Cuidamos oral history project. During the pandemic, I collaborated with them, and between us, we had like about four folks interviewing mutual aid workers in the Bushwick area, and we contributed those stories onto their map. And so I'm happy to find that URL and post it in the chat. So if you wanted to follow more about their work, you can learn more about that. But the New York City chapter has been interested in implementing more oral history in their documentary efforts. And so they're always open to working in collaboration with other groups. And so it would be great to see if they can like collaborate with folks who are interested in similar projects in Puerto Rico. I think that would be really beneficial. So I'm happy to share that information with you in the chat.
I would love to have that link. I also wanted to ask, you worked the oral history side of that project. How did you manage to incorporate oral history into that mapping project?
Well, we were interested in collecting the stories, and they have a page on their site that they devoted to this particular spin-off project. But initially what they did was they took like the short clips that we garnered from the full-length interviews, and they attached the URL of that story to the neighborhood map. So you designate an area on the map, and then they would attach the audiovisual file or a link of the interview along with that location. And so that was one way that they incorporated it into their map. I know that with my own other project, this is a longstanding project I've had for many years, Cities for People, Not for Profit. I've been documenting stories of gentrification and housing justice in Bushwick since the mid-2000s, and they incorporated some of my stories in their map as well. But yes, I'll be happy to share that link with you so you could learn more about that. And the oral history interviews during the pandemic, when we did the collaborative effort with Nos Cuidamos, we did all those interviews via Zoom because again, it was the pandemic. And so folks didn't, we didn't want to put folks at risk through masking. And so we were able to gather and those audio interviews through Zoom and post those and share those on the SoundCloud channel for anti-eviction, as well as on my website on Cities for People, Not for Profit. I'll drop that information now in the chat for you. But I hope that answered your question.
It did. Thank you. Thank you so much.
No problem.
Any
I'm
other
sorry.
questions?
Yeah.
Sorry.
No worries, Jose. If folks have their hands up or anything, just feel free to let me know. I'm happy to answer any questions, or if you had any questions for anybody else.
Si alguien tiene preguntas, pueden abrir su micrófono, colocarla en el chat, con confianza.
Good morning, Cynthia. I had a quick question and kind of like a request. So I was very interested in your documentary, Mujeres Atrevidas. So I was wondering if, well, once the project is finished, is there a way that you could send us a link or somehow give us access to that documentary? Because I would love to watch it.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the support. Yes, I'm going to be posting a link to my website as well, and that's where I'm going to have the updates on the projects. But yes, once it's available, I'll be happy to share it with Jose, to share with participants post this conversation. We're in the midst of setting up a project website for the film as we speak. I'm actually finalizing it to see if I could get it published by this weekend. So I'm almost ready with that website for the project, and all the updates will be posted there, but I'll also be sure to post it on my own website, which I'll share in the chat.
Thank you so much.
Yes, and we're actually avidly, I just was notified recently, I got fiscal sponsorship through the New York Foundation for the Arts for the film. So all my crowd sourced funding campaigns will be taking place through their portal. And I'm always open to, if this is something that you feel you want to support, we're always looking for donorship and support for the film, and also just to build buzz around the project. So I'll be happy to share that. And if folks can also help to amplify that message in their circles, we would really appreciate it, because it is an important story to share. And we're hoping that it can help amplify the work that the Proyecto Justicia Social folks are doing, which is really important work. I'm not sure how it translates in the situation in Puerto Rico, whether there are similar actions taking place, but with low-wage immigrant labor here in the States and in New York in particular, there's a lot of momentum going on in New York State at this time. And the deliveristas currently are fighting to ensure a better standard livable wage for the kind of work that they do, because they're susceptible to a lot more dangers in regards, especially around traffic and bike accidents and stealing of their equipment, because they're susceptible to people robbing them of their bikes. It's like all these sorts of issues that when we think about how they're not even insured through any central mechanism, because they're considered independent contractors through their work. They're not hired by companies. They work as independent contractors. While that has some benefits, it has also a lot of minuses, mostly that there are no protections that they can be insured of. And so one of them also is that wage, and they've been fighting actively for it, especially this past month. So we're hoping that hopefully this movie can also shed some light and increase awareness to those issues for this group.
Cynthia, I was going to ask, in terms of academia, going out and collaborating with communities and doing this type of work, could you speak a little bit about important things to keep in mind to be sure to not engage in practices that might be extractivist, or just keeping in mind to be aware of presenting communities in a respectful way, just being mindful of how communities and community members are portrayed?
Absolutely. I think it's just really important for folks to keep in mind to please think about incorporating community members you are documenting. I think that the first way that folks can ensure that is by including the folks who are being documented. Again, it sort of speaks to the participatory nature of project design. I think the only way to help ensure that people are being represented fairly is to increase the level of transparency. And of course, that also poses its own sets of challenges, right? Like how much is too much participation, or how do you sort of navigate that? I'm sort of experiencing that a little bit myself, because in oral history, it's it's a more welcoming environment, but then also thinking about even the consent, the release forms, thinking about re-envisioning what that entails, what do you do when a narrator comes back to you and says, I felt comfortable before being represented in this project, but now I don't feel that comfortable? One way I've helped to ensure people feel comfortable is by saying, I have a no questions asked to take down policy in my projects and in my work. So if at any time someone just feels apprehensive about having their thing online or participating in any way, shape, or form, they don't need to even give me an excuse. I just take it down, because the idea is that you're building that trust and that level of communication with your narrator. And I think that that translates towards the idea of how can we be more mindful and more transparent in our processes to help increase levels of engagement and participation in these projects. It begins with that. And as oral historians in our training, we're already nuanced in that. So it's just basically a simple extension of that, right? You just extend it just a bit further. And when people have that trust and that faith that you're not there to exploit their story, that they have a say in how they're going to get represented, people are a lot less resistant and they participate more. And I think that also helps inform and helps increase the level of participation and engagement with a community to like help ensure. But obviously it also comes with the understanding that you're aware of what may or may not be in the interest of the community. And that can only happen if you have that level of engagement with the community that you're documenting. So again, it's sort of like leaving yourself open to that communication and that dialogue so that there is a certain set of community standards or community agreement, right? Especially if you've ever facilitated meetings before. Sometimes, I don't know if folks are familiar with those modes, but like the idea of like, can we all reach a consensus about what are our community agreements? I view each project as the beginning conversations always about what are our community agreements? And then you sort of come up with them as a group. And then with the understanding that if at any time something has to change, you can have the space to have that discussion to discuss whether that's the right appropriate move or not, but always have it take place in an operating from a sense of like, this is participatory, non-hierarchical, if that makes any sense.
That's great. Thank you very much. And we do have a question from Michael González Cruz. Michael, adelante.
Hey, saludos, muy buenos días. Muchas gracias por su conferencia. La verdad que me alegra mucho saber cómo han luchado las comunidades nuestras en la ciudad. Yo he trabajado con historias de vida de nuestros prisioneros políticos y de guerra, de la FARC y de los macheteros, con historias de vida de los trabajadores en los bosques en los 30, con Carlos Carrero, que está por ahí. También hemos hecho entrevistas de cazadores en el litoral de Boquerón. Y estoy ahora pensando incursionar en esto de las historias orales de las comunidades. Quería que me mencionaras algunos lugares donde podemos mirar para buscar fondos y para hacer estos trabajos. Gracias.
No, muchas gracias. Sí, yo creo que al nivel del gobierno hay muchas, hay oportunidades nacionales que podría cualificar. La primera que se me viene en mente sería como IMLS. IMLS, a veces ellos tienen oportunidades para fondos para estos tipos de proyectos. Y también yo diría NEH, mientras NEH, National Endowment for the Humanities, a veces ellos son bien competitivos, también ellos tienen oportunidades a ese nivel nacional y puede ser que también eso podría ser, especialmente si es que es basado en comunidad y en el afán de tenerlo ser archivado para, con tal que tengan, la meta es para educación. Yo creo que hay mucho, yo buscaría fondos que se coinciden con la misión educativa. So, si es que tú estás haciendo o si tú quieres hacer el proyecto y también quieres incorporar un elemento de educación en tu proyecto, eso también puede aumentar que cualificas para fondos a través de educación. Yo he jugado con buscando oportunidades que no solamente interpretan educación, sino arte también. Por eso es que también hay fondos para proyectos de arte. So, si uno puede, proyectos archivales, historia oral, puede coincidir con arte, puede coincidir con iniciativas educativas de kindergarten a escuela secundaria, iniciativas académicas, iniciativas con veteranos o y en tu caso, tu proyecto, si me puedes acordar otra vez de qué se trata el tema de tu proyecto, ¿es un grupo particular?
Mira, en el pasado son historias de vida de los miembros de las Fuerzas Armadas de Liberación Nacional, los presos políticos, pero ya eso pasó.
Claro, eso
Igual,
es historia militar.
ya,
Podrías hasta aplicar para fondos que tienen que ver con historia militar. Y si es que
podría
fuera,
ser,
tú sabes,
pero
mi estrategia siempre ha sido buscar fondos de una manera bien amplia y después las más específicas saben tener menos fondos, pero tienes más garantía de tener esos fondos. A veces la cantidad es mucho más pequeña, pero también puedes encontrar en otras áreas donde puede haber interés en tu sujeto.
muchas gracias. Tengo una idea que es hacer un poco de historia sobre el impacto de base Raimi en Aguadilla, y esto lo puedo hacer con Carlos Hernández, con Carlos Carrero, que también están. Se me ocurrió ahora, así que muchas gracias, extraordinario.
De nada, gracias.
Gracias, Michael. And we have a question from Carlos E. Hernández. Adelante, Carlos.
Sí, buenos días. I feel comfortable, speaking Spanish. Yo le hice unas preguntas en el chat, se la escribí en inglés y siempre es bien difícil. Yo trabajo historia oral. Yo soy profesor aquí de historia y mi especialidad es historia oral. Entonces trabajo como lo que usted dice, ¿verdad? Con historias militares. Yo hice un trabajo sobre los veteranos de la Segunda Guerra Mundial y la comunidad, ¿verdad? El frente, el domestic front, la gente que se quedaron, que no fueron a la guerra. Pero ¿cómo se le hizo tuvo que ser bien difícil, ¿verdad? La variedad de culturas que hay en el Bronx. Yo fui maestro en James Monroe High School. Eso está en Boynton Avenue, cerca de donde está la ruta del tren 6. Yo viví allí cerca de 2 años, trabajé allí. Y la diversidad de culturas es una cosa increíble, ¿verdad? Y tenemos hasta gente de Pakistán, India, toda la gama de latinoamericanos, hay muchos mexicanos. ¿Cómo fue ese contacto? ¿Cómo pudo lidiar con ellos? ¿Se sintieron cómodos cuando tenían la cámara encima? Porque eso es un gran problema. La gente le tiene terror a las cámaras, a las grabaciones. ¿Cómo fue ese proceso de selección, verdad? Cuéntanos un poco sobre eso.
Bueno, yo me he enfocado la mayoría de las veces cuando yo trabajo con comunidades en el Bronx o en Brooklyn. Yo creo que hay mucha diversidad en las dos áreas en la ciudad, y la ciudad en general es muy diverso. Con tal que yo creo que también tiene que ver con lo que yo digo al principio de la presentación. También tienes que dar ese aseguramiento a tu narradora o a tu narrador que ellos pueden confiar en ti y que tú vas a ser respetuoso con su cuento, ¿no? Es la narrativa de ellos. Y si tú les das a ellos un nivel de autonomía durante la entrevista, donde ellos se sienten que son capaces de hablar si es que se sienten inconfortables o lo que sea, ahí va bajando un poco esa resistencia que gente puede tener o temor, ¿no? Y a veces la gente responden mejor a grabaciones solamente de audio sin cámara o cámara. En tal caso, es mejor ser uno flexible y proveer eso como una opción para ellos, si es que se sienten más confortables enfrente de una cámara o sin cámara, ofrecer esa opción a tu narrador o a tu narradora.
Claro.
Y también otra táctica que yo he usado cuando yo he documentado a los estudiantes en mi colegio, en mi universidad, donde yo trabajo en Bronx Community College, los proyectos que yo hago ahí, yo incorporo la ayuda de los estudiantes. Cuando yo tengo estos proyectos, yo sé incorporar educación en estos proyectos porque también me ayuda a accesar más fondos, pero también yo entreno a los estudiantes para que ellos también entrevistan a los otros estudiantes de esos grupos. Yo trato ¿cómo se dirá? I recruit students, ¿no? De esas áreas, de esas demografías, de esas comunidades, para que ellos con esa capacidad de hacer la entrevista, que entre ellos tienen más confianza, también los estudiantes tienen menos temor en compartir un cuento con otro estudiante que con una maestra, un maestro, un profesor. Juega con la dinámica, veas con quién puedes colaborar y si es que inglés o el español no son lenguas donde ellos pueden participar o se sienten confortables, tratar, si es que tienes la capacidad, idealmente encontrar una persona que haga la entrevista en la lengua donde ellos se sienten más confortables hablando. Claro que eso también viene con un costo, tienes que traducir esa entrevista después, pero yo creo que eso también ayuda a disminuir el level de temor y también puede darte una entrevista mucho más vibrante, ¿no? Uno donde la narradora o el narrador se siente confortable compartiendo, ¿no?
Y así
al,
fue el caso.
al fin del día es poder encontrar y mantener una relación positiva cuando estás ahí, desde el principio mantener una relación con tu narrador o tu narradora donde ellos pueden, eso toma tiempo, estás formando una amistad con esa persona, porque eso es un trabajo súper personal.
Sí.
Y tienes que mantener y estar en contacto con ellos antes, durante y después de la entrevista, para que ellos sepan que tú no te vas a desaparecer de su vida, o si es que ellos quieren también darles acceso a una copia de la entrevista. Ellos sienten que son parte de eso y eso ayuda.
Muy bien. Lo voy a dejar aquí, la felicito, así que para que los otros compañeros puedan hablar. Muchas gracias.
Bueno, estamos un poquito sobre la hora, ¿verdad? Pero si hay una última pregunta. A ver, la mano que hay es de Michael González, que ya fue. Bueno, pues Cynthia, lo voy a concluir así en español. Entonces, muchísimas gracias por tu presentación hoy. Nos encantó, estuvo tremenda. Sé que va a ser de mucho beneficio para todas las personas que asistieron hoy. Así que, pues, te agradecemos muchísimo.
No hay
Bueno.
problema. Y yo puse mi email, estoy poniendo mi email ahí en el chat. Si es que gente que no han tenido tiempo, participantes en someter una pregunta, siempre me pueden mandar un email y yo estaría más que feliz contestar cualquier pregunta después de la presentación.
Perfecto. Perfecto, muchísimas gracias, Cynthia. Vamos cerrando entonces. Gracias a todas las personas por asistir y nos veremos en la próxima actividad.
Muchas gracias. Que pasen bien. Gracias.